Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick preview and prediction for Billy Joe Saunders versus Canelo Alvarez. This fight goes down on the 8th of May, takes place at the AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. But before we start this video, a big shout out to one of my subscribers, Michael Van Gerwen, aka Kevin. He actually made this thumbnail for this video. He did it completely off his own back, and yeah, I just really wanted to express my gratitude to Michael Van Gerwen, so big up to him, man. Much appreciated, bro. But yeah, interesting fight. You know, when this fight first got announced, I've got to be honest, I really wasn't all that excited, but as we're getting closer, I am a little more into it now. It goes without saying, obviously Canelo Alvarez is the consummate professional. He's always in shape and he always turns up ready to go. But as for Billy Joe Saunders, you know, he's had a career of ill discipline. He's not always turned up in the greatest of shape, constantly blows up in weight. And all in all, he's a guy who, in my opinion, hasn't really delivered on the potential that he does have. So I've never really trusted Billy Joe Saunders when it comes to the big fight scenario, and that's exactly what this is. But having said that, leading up to this fight, he's been training for a long time. He does actually look in very good shape, some of the best shape I've seen him in, quite frankly. So, you know, I think Billy Joe genuinely is going in there to win this fight. Whether it's enough or not, we'll see on May the 8th. But yeah, I am looking forward to this fight more now as we get closer. But let's briefly break down the tail of the tape. We shall start with Canelo Alvarez. He has a record of 55 wins, 1 defeat, 2 draws, 37 of his 55 wins coming by way of knockout. Billy Joe Saunders has a perfect record of 30-0, with 14 of those 30 wins coming by way of knockout. Canelo Alvarez is listed as 5'8" with a 70.5-inch reach, whereas Billy Joe Saunders is listed as 5'11" with a 71-inch reach. So Billy Joe Saunders is the taller, longer man, 3 inches in height. He's got half an inch in reach. So he's definitely the taller, longer man, and he'll definitely need to utilise that on fight night. Canelo Alvarez is 30 years old, whereas Billy Joe Saunders is 31 years old. Canelo is an orthodox fighter, whereas Billy Joe Saunders is a southpaw. And that southpaw advantage for Billy Joe Saunders is definitely one of his big plus points going into this fight. He needs to make the most of it. I mean, when you look back in the day, I know it's a little while ago, but Canelo has struggled with slick southpaws. Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara, those fights were very close and too close for comfort, in my opinion. So Billy Joe Saunders definitely needs to try and utilise that southpaw advantage in this fight with his slick style. But yeah, now the tail of the tape is out of the way, let's break down what I believe each guy should do, and then I'll give you my official prediction. I guess we shall start with the underdog, Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders going into this fight, we know realistically that he can't stop Canelo unless something freak happens, like Canelo gets an injury or he gets cut by a punch where he can't continue. Billy Joe cannot stop Canelo. He doesn't punch hard enough, he's not aggressive enough, and he's just not that sort of fighter, quite frankly. So we all know really what Billy Joe Saunders has to do in this fight. He needs to be the guy who's boxing and moving. He needs to make Canelo Alvarez take the lead and apply pressure. If Canelo has one weak point to his game, I would say it's his foot speed. You go back to when he fought Erislandy Lara, Mayweather, Austin Trout, the guys who could box and move a little bit, even Miguel Cotto to a lesser degree. If you watch these fights, Canelo Alvarez has never really looked good at cutting the ring off against a fleet-footed guy. And people will say, well, those fights were years ago, Delboy. Canelo's definitely improved since then, blah-de-blah. Well, maybe, but ultimately, we've not really seen Canelo in with that style since. A guy who can box and move, make Canelo take the initiative, make him take the lead. We've not really seen Canelo in with that style since. Maybe he has improved against those sort of guys, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe that's just a weak point in Canelo's game, but ultimately, it's up to Billy Joe Saunders to test that and ask that question of Canelo Alvarez. He needs to constantly keep his feet moving in this fight. Obviously, he cannot afford to be stationary against Canelo, where Canelo can close the distance and land his combination punches to body and head. Billy Joe Saunders needs to minimise the times where his back touches the ropes in this fight, and he needs to avoid the corner. He needs to keep this fight in the middle of a ring, he needs to keep active with that southpaw jab, and he needs to pivot away from Canelo's power hand. And ultimately, he needs to be making Canelo reset as much as possible in this fight. Canelo's a guy with great punch technique, and he can throw every single punch in the book. He's got a great left hook, he's got a great right hook, great straight right hand, great jab, great hooks to the body, great uppercuts. Canelo can throw every single punch in the book, but he needs to set his feet in order to do so. Canelo isn't really great at punching on the front foot, and that's what Billy Joe needs to make Canelo do. Fight on the front foot, while staying active with a jab, keep on pivoting away, and making Canelo reset every single time. The more he can make Canelo reset, the more chance he's got on winning rounds in this fight. Billy Joe needs to look at, especially what Erislandy Lara did, in my opinion. He needs to replicate a similar game plan, but unlike Lara, he does need to be a lot more active in this fight. He can't afford to go walkabouts to the extent where Lara was, because Lara was boxing really well, but he took too many rounds off, in my opinion, and he basically gave that fight away. So Billy Joe needs to follow a similar game plan, but be more active with a jab, be more active with those straight left counters, and make sure in this fight you're all the way out. Billy can't afford to set his feet with Canelo and trade. Canelo is just a better combination puncher, a better counter puncher, a harder puncher, more accurate, better punch technique. Billy Joe can't afford to stand in the pocket or at mid-range with Canelo and trade and take too many chances. Billy Joe needs to be extremely safety first in this fight, taking minimal risks and basically making Canelo make the fight. It's in Texas, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Billy Joe. You might hear the crowd boo, but he needs to keep that out of his mind and he needs to frustrate Canelo. If you're making the crowd boo, Billy Joe's doing something right. So that's what he needs to aim for in this fight. He needs to make Canelo chase the fight, try to build up an early lead, and then go from there kind of thing. And one more thing that Billy Joe needs to improve on in this fight is his gas tank. Hopefully he's been working on his cardio during training camp, because one thing about Billy Joe, in numerous fights in his career he's gassed out. I'm talking way back when as well. The Nick Blackwell fight started really well, he faded. The Chris Eubank Jr. fight, same thing, started really well, faded. The John Ryder fight, same thing. The Artur Akova fight, same thing. The Andy Lee fight, same thing. A lot of times in Billy Joe's career, his stamina hasn't been on point, and in this fight, Billy Joe's stamina needs to be as good as it's ever been, and better. Because I'll be honest, if it's the same gas tank from previous fights for Billy Joe Saunders, even the Martin Murray fight, Billy Joe Saunders will lose this fight. His level of cardio needs to be next level in this fight, and that's a big area for him in this bout, in my opinion. But ultimately, we know what Billy Joe needs to do. He needs to box and move and try his best to make this relatively decisive. You know, because even if he wins 7 rounds to 5, the likelihood of him getting a decision is very unlikely, right? So Billy Joe needs to box a perfect fight ultimately. He needs to be switched on, his stamina needs to be on point, he needs to be active with the jab, and don't engage with Canelo. Make it your fight, you know, don't let Canelo get a foothold, don't let your back touch the ropes, don't be in the corner, don't trade, just box and move, try and be boring, try and make the crowd boo. That's what Billy Joe needs to do. Simple as that. As for Canelo Alvarez, well, again, we know how Billy's going to approach this fight. He's going to be boxing and moving, so ultimately it's up to Canelo to pressure this man, chase him down, and slow him down, basically. Obviously, that will start with the feet. Canelo needs to get his front foot on the outside of Billy Joe's foot and take that position, and essentially try and slowly walk him down from there. When you look at the Erislandy Lara fight and the Austin Trout fight, Canelo's foot positioning in those fights wasn't particularly great at times. The southpaws were getting their foot on the outside more so than he was. So Canelo's foot placement in this fight needs to be more on point than it was against previous slick southpaws, and he needs to apply pressure from there and walk Billy Joe Saunders down. Obviously, Canelo's a great fighter when it comes to head movement. He's very good at slipping punches and getting underneath and then firing his own work. You know, the straight punches of Billy Joe, which he primarily throws from the outside, Canelo needs to be looking while coming forwards to try and roll under those shots, quickly close the distance, and, you know, work to that body and try and slow Billy Joe Saunders down that way. Getting on the inside and getting close to Billy Joe might be tricky early on, so when Canelo does actually manage to do that, he cannot afford to neglect the body of Billy Joe Saunders. We mentioned earlier that Billy Joe Saunders, in numerous fights in the past, has had a bad gas tank, and what better way to exasperate that by working his body early on. So any time or any chance Canelo gets to work Billy's body in the early rounds, he needs to take that. When you're fighting a slick fighter and you get off to a bad start, sometimes it is very frustrating and you're tempted to try and clean the guy out with a headshot. And Canelo could get frustrated in the early rounds of this fight. So he just really needs to keep his composure, try not to get too frustrated and go for solely headshots, and actually try and work that body when he can, to try and test Billy Joe Saunders' gas tank and ultimately slow him down as the fight goes on. And once Billy Joe does start to slow down, then Canelo Alvarez potentially could be more able to land headshots, in particular with that straight right hand, which a southpaw is definitely vulnerable. So, you know, try and work that body early on, maintain your lead foot positioning, make sure it's on the outside, and he needs to be circling to his left, even when he's using the jab. When he does this, he'll be in more of a position to throw that straight right hand. And also when you do this against a southpaw, when you circle to your left, keep your lead foot on the outside, you actually take away the chances of him landing his straight left hand. That's one thing I've noticed about Canelo. He does actually have good footwork, but when it comes to southpaws, it's not the best. So that's why I'm mentioning footwork a lot in this breakdown. But yeah, ultimately, the foot positioning in this fight will be very important for Canelo, and I think working that body early on as well for Canelo could pay its dividends as this fight actually wears on. Obviously also, Canelo Alvarez is a very good counterpuncher, one of the best counterpunchers in my opinion in the sport of boxing. And listen, Billy Joe Saunders is a defensively minded fighter. He doesn't take too many risks, but there are certain counterpunch opportunities there. In particular, his jab can definitely be countered in my opinion. One shot that Billy Joe Saunders occasionally likes to throw, well, he actually throws it quite regularly, is the straight left hand to the body. If Canelo Alvarez can get the beat on that shot, that's a great opportunity for Canelo to land that straight right hand counter, that short chopping right hand counter, because Billy Joe Saunders, when he throws that shot, he is quite open, his chin is in the air, he actually falls in quite a lot when he throws that shot. So if Canelo can actually get the beat on that and get the read on that, I think countering that straight left hand to the body could be very effective for Canelo Alvarez in this fight. Another thing for Canelo in this fight would actually be to draw the lead hand of Billy Joe Saunders. Obviously, while doing this against a southpaw, again, as we mentioned earlier, Canelo's lead foot needs to be on the outside and he needs to be lined up for that straight right hand. But if Canelo Alvarez can play a battle of lead hand control with Billy Joe Saunders, maybe throw a few light jabs on the gloves, try and draw a jab out of Billy Joe Saunders, slip, and then come through with a straight right hand counter. You know, Canelo can definitely also bait Billy Joe Saunders in this fight to land hard counter punches. And if he lands one of these shots, I actually think Canelo Alvarez can hurt Billy Joe. And who knows, maybe he could even stop him. You know, Billy was definitely hurt against Chris Eubank Jr. with an uppercut. He was hurt by an overhand right against Shifa Isufi. Canelo can definitely hurt Billy Joe Saunders. If he can land a precise, hard, sharp counter in this fight, I do believe he's got the power to hurt Billy Joe Saunders. So yeah, Canelo definitely needs to try and also counter in this fight. I think he's got the ability to draw the lead and land some hurtful shots or catch Billy Joe Saunders slipping while he overcommits or makes a mistake defensively. So obviously Canelo needs to look out for those areas as well. That's one of his best suits in his game, is that counter punching. So he needs to try and utilise that in this fight. But ultimately, Canelo needs to be Canelo with a little more aggression, a little more foot speed. He needs to close that distance a little more quickly and really be the aggressor in this fight. And yeah, ultimately that's how I believe Canelo should approach this fight. But onto my official prediction. Who do I believe wins this fight? Listen, man, while I believe Billy Joe Saunders can give Canelo problems for a few rounds, while he looks in really good shape, I just can't trust Billy Joe Saunders to box a perfect 12-round fight against Canelo Alvarez. I don't think he's got the discipline. I'm not convinced about his gas tank. And even if most fans think he wins this fight like 7 rounds to 5, maybe even 8 rounds to 4, there's no guarantee whatsoever that he actually gets the decision. So picking Billy Joe Saunders in this fight to me is a very risky one, and I just don't see it happening, if I'm being honest. So my official prediction in this fight is Canelo Alvarez to win, either by late stoppage or on points, a relatively competitive points win. That's how I see this fight going. I think I'll go with points in this fight. Canelo Alvarez on points. But yeah, that's my prediction video. Share yours below. Does anybody here think Billy Joe can pull off the upset? Or like me, do you believe Canelo Alvarez has way too much? Share your thoughts below. It's been your guy Delboy. Peace.